Hi everyone! Today we will be talking about part writing of secondary dominants. So what is part writing? Part writing is a musical experience for you to balance the vertical aspect, which is chords, and the horizontal aspect, which is melodic movement of music. The multiple voices involved have their own musical entities that together paint the picture of a musical phrase. Good part writing involves smooth transitions, tendency tone resolution, and an intricate texture. The skill can be challenging, requiring immense craft and compromise, but part writing will really strengthen your ability to spell chords on the go. Many composers used part writing. The SATB format, or soprano, alto, tenor, bass, aids in the visualization of part writing with 4 unique voices. Imagine 4 cars traveling to the same destination. They need to be in their own lanes and avoid obstacles, but they can go any way they want as long as they don't run into each other. Writing 4-part music is pretty similar. The soprano, alto, tenor, and bass need to work together to move the melody along without merging lanes or crashing. There's also 3-part writing, but that's not as common. I'll save that for another day. Now let's look into contrapuntal motion between 2 voices. Contrapuntal motion between 2 voices can be categorized as similar, parallel, contrary, and oblique. In similar motion, both voices move in the same direction, so they either both move up or they both move down. In parallel motion, both voices move in the same direction and by the same interval. In contrary motion, voices move in opposite directions, so if one voice is moving up, then the other voice moves down, and if one voice is moving down, then the other voice moves up. In oblique motion, one voice remains the same while the other voice moves up or down. And now for the fun part. Part writing restrictions and requirements. Rules, rules, rules. So let's see. Parallel fifths, octaves, unison, or fourths are not allowed. Voices, which are the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, cannot overlap each other. So for example, the tenor cannot be higher than the alto. Never use a tendency tone twice in one chord. A tendency tone can be something like the leading tone or the 7th of a chord. You cannot have more than an octave between the 2 upper voices, so that would be the alto and the soprano. Tendency tones, like the leading tone and the 7th of a chord, must resolve a step down in the next beat. 60% of the motion between the bass and soprano, which are the lowest and highest voices, must be either contrary or oblique motion. Writing the parts. How to go about writing voices in SATB form when you're given Roman numerals that indicate chord functions. So when you're confronted with a staff, a key, and a plethora of Roman numerals, what should you do? Well, the first thing you should do is identify the key and its leading tone. So let's say you're in G major, then your leading tone would be F sharp. So the next thing you do is spell out the chords. So if you have a 5 chord in D major, that would be an A major chord, so you would just write A, C sharp, E. Then the third thing you should do is take note of the root of each chord. Well, in part writing, the Roman numerals use figured bass. So if you have a 5-7 chord in C major, that would be G, B, D, F, and G would be the root. So a 7 implies that the 7th chord is in root position. But what if you have a 5-6-5 chord? Well, If you have a 5-6-5 chord in C major, that would be the same thing, G, B, D, F, but B would be the root. So any chord with a 6-5 implies a 7th chord in first inversion. If you have a 5-4-3 chord in C major, it would still be G, B, D, F, but D would be the root. So a 4-3 chord would be a 7th chord in second inversion. Lastly, if you have a 5-4-2 chord in C major, that would be G, B, D, F again, but F would be the root. So in conclusion, any chord with a 4-2 implies a 7th chord in third inversion. So let's think about this. What's the root of a 2-6-5 chord in D major? The next step is to write the bass voice, which consists of the chord's roots first, and ensure that the bass's movement is as conjunct as possible. But what does that mean? Conjunct means that the melody is mostly stepwise and you don't have major intervallic skip. And disjunct means the opposite of that, so there are many intervallic skips that are higher than a major third. The next thing you need to do is write the soprano voice. And you need to keep in mind that 60% of the movement between the soprano and bass is either contrary motion or oblique motion. After that, fill in the alto and tenor. And if you need to, make any accommodations to the soprano. And keep in mind the requirements and restrictions of part writing. After that, if you encounter a secondary dominant function, you should skip it and proceed to the next chord. After you spell out the next chord and identify its root, go back to the secondary dominant and fill in the missing information. Watch my Chord Talks music video to learn about secondary dominants in detail, and the link will be in the description. The 8th step is to make sure the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass each have a smooth melody line and there aren't any awkward intervallic leaps. And lastly, double check your part writing piece and make sure it's correct. Now it's time for part writing practice. Now let's look into a 2-measure example of part writing. We're given the Roman numerals, so now let's write the parts. So we see that the first chord is given to us and it's an A major chord. So then it moves to a 5-6-5 chord. So that means that G sharp would be the bass, and I've written the bass notes here already. And then we move back to the 1 chord, so the root note is an A. Then here we have a secondary dominant. So let's skip the secondary dominant and go to the next chord. So this chord is a minor 2 chord, which would be a B minor chord. So it's B, D, F sharp, and B is the root. So over here, since this is a 5-6-5 of 2 chord, we need to find the 5-6-5 of B minor. So that would be an F sharp 7 chord. So the notes would be F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E sharp. And since it's a 6-5 chord, the root would be A sharp. Then after the minor 2 chord, we have a 5 chord, which is just E major, and we go back to 1, so it's an authentic cadence. Now let's write the parts. So first we have a 5-6-5 chord, and the bass is a G sharp. So let's write the soprano first, since that was the step that came after writing the bass. So for the soprano note here, we could preferably go a step up or a step down. So let's try going a step down. So the soprano there would be a B, because it's a step down from C sharp, and that makes the melody conjunct so far. So after that, for the 1 chord, we can go a step up or a step down. So let's go to an A, since it's an A major chord. Okay, next we have a secondary dominant, So let's skip it and go to the minor 2 chord first. So I think we should pick a note that's close to the A so that when we have a transition from the secondary dominant to the 2 chord, it's smooth. So we can go a step up since B is in the chord. So B can be the soprano note of the 2 chord. Now let's go back to the secondary dominant. And since we have an A here and a B here, A sharp would fit perfectly over here. But A sharp, even though A sharp fits over there, A sharp is already taken in the bass, so we can put a C sharp there instead. Now let's move to the 5 chord. Since we have a B over here, it would be preferred that we go a step up or a step down, but C and A aren't in the key, in the chord of E minor. So we can go down to a G sharp. That wouldn't be too big of a leap. And since this is an A major chord, it would work perfectly if we just end with an A in the soprano. So now we've done the soprano and a bass, let's look at the type of motion that we have between the 2 voices. So first we have a G sharp and a B. The B goes down to an A, and the G sharp goes up to an A, so that would be contrary motion, and that's favorable. Next we have an A going to the C, and this A is going to an A sharp, so that would be similar motion because they're both going in the same direction, but they're not going up by the same interval. Okay, let's look at the next transition. So now we have a C sharp to a B, and the bass is going from an A sharp to a B. So the soprano is going down and the bass is going up, so that's contrary motion and that's good. Next we have a B to a G sharp and a B to an E. That would be similar motion. And after that we have similar motion because both of the voices are going up to A's. Now let's do the tenor and alto voices. So for the first chord, since we have an E over here, then it would work perfectly for this voice to go, for the alto of this chord to be a D, because it's stepwise motion. So we can put a D over here. And for the tenor voice, since we already used G sharp, B, and D, the only voice left is an E. So let's put an E in the tenor. Okay, next we have our A major chord again. So it's good to keep as many common tones as possible, so it would work great if we just leave the tenor on an E with this A major chord. And for the alto, since we have E, D, it would be great to go in a stepwise motion, so we would have E, D, and then C sharp. So C sharp would work well there. Now let's go to our secondary dominant chord. So we can do an E in the alto because C sharp to E isn't that big of an intervallic leap. And after that, we have, so let's see, we did the C sharp, the A sharp, and the E. So we can do an F sharp in the tenor. So let's put an F sharp in the tenor. Now we have our 2 chord, which is a B minor chord. So since we have an E in the alto, we could move the alto down to a D. And since it's good to keep common tones, we can leave the tenor with an F sharp. So the tenor is on an F sharp, and the alto is on a D. That creates a good B minor chord. Now we have the 5 chord, so we can make the tenor go down to an E, because F sharp to E is only a step, not a leap. And we can have a B in the alto because that's the only note we have left, and D to B isn't that big of an intervallic leap. And now for our last chord, we have the A major chord. So we can keep the E common in the tenor, and we can have the B go to a C, and that works. Okay, now let's listen to our part writing that we created. Here's another one. This time we're in F major, and the first chord is already given to us, so let's move to the next chord, which is a 5-7 chord. So in this key, the 5-7 chord would be C, E, G, B flat, and C is the bass. So let's put in the bass notes. Now for the next chord, it's a minor 6 chord, so the root would be a D since it's in root position. Now we have a secondary dominant, so let's skip it and go to the next chord, which is a 2-6 chord. Since it isn't a 6-5 chord, we don't include the 7th, so it would just be G, B flat, D. And B flat is the bass, so let's put a B flat here. Now let's go back to the secondary dominant. Since the 2 chord is G minor, we need to find the 5-4-2 chord of G minor, and that would be a D7, and C is the root because it's a 4-2 chord. So there's a C. Now we have the 5 chord, which would just be C, E, G, and it's in root position, so we just have a C here. And for the last chord, it's just a 1 chord, so the root would be an F. Let's move on to the soprano. So over here for the first soprano, from the A we can either go to a B or a G. So since G is in the 5-7 chord, we can use that as our soprano. For the next one, we can either go to an A or an F. So we can go to an A for the soprano. For the next chord, we have our secondary dominant. So let's see. We can keep common tones. We can keep the A as a common tone in the soprano because it's good to keep common tones in part writing. So we have an A again in the soprano. Then we move to our 2-6 chord, and we can either move to a B flat or a G, and they would both be valid options, but let's just experiment and move down to a G. So we have a G as a soprano. Moving on to the 5 chord, we can just keep the common tone. So we can have a G again in the soprano. For our last chord, we can move to either an F or an A. I think we should move to an A for the soprano. So we have our bass and soprano. Let's fill in the alto and tenor parts. So now we have a G in the soprano. So our alto would be nice as an E because the F moves down as a stepwise motion to E. So we can have an E as the alto. Now let's look at the tenor. So since we have a C in the tenor of the F major chord, we can move that down a step to B flat since it's in the chord. So B flat would be our tenor. Now let's move to the minor 6 chord. We can move the E a step up back to the F because F is in the chord. So F is our alto, and let's see what we can do with the tenor. So since we have a B flat in the tenor of the 5/7 chord, let's just slide it down a step to A. So now we have a nice conjunct melody in all of the parts so far. Now let's move to the secondary dominant chord. For our alto, we can use D as our alto. And it would be nice to have a tritone in the bottom so it can resolve later on in the progression. So that's why I saved the F sharp as the tenor note. Now let's move to the 2/6 chord. So we can make this F sharp move up to a G. And as you can see there, the tritone resolves nicely to a minor 6th interval, B flat to G. Now let's do the alto. So it's good to keep common tones, so we can just keep D as our alto. For our 5 chord, we can just slide D up a step to E. And as you can see, we keep G as the common tone in the soprano, so that's good. For our tenor, we can keep G as a common tone. So this melody is working out nicely because we have so many common tones. For the last chord, we can just keep F as our alto note. And it isn't necessary to have a tenor note in a 3-note chord. So it would be nice to just keep this as an F, so the bass and tenor can share the F. Let's look at another part writing example. This time we're in A minor. So let's take a look at the 5/4/3 chord that comes after the minor 1 chord. So it would be an E7 chord, but B would be the root. So let's put a B as our bass note. Next we have a minor 1 again, but it's in the 6th form, so that means we don't have the 7th, but C would be our root. Now we have a 7 diminished 7 chord, so that would be a G sharp B D F chord, and since it just has a 7, not any other form of figured bass, we would just have G sharp as our root. We have a 1 chord again, so A would be our root. Now we have a minor 2 half diminished 6/5 chord, so that would be B D F A. So as you can see, there's a minor third between the B and the D, a minor third between the D and an F, but a major third between the F and an A, and that makes it half diminished. And since this is a 6/5 chord, D would be our root. So D would be our bass. Let's keep the bass down so we have room for the alto. And for our last one, we have something interesting here. It's a 5/4/3 suspension. So let's first think about our 5 chord. That would be, let's just think about the root and the 5th first. So that'd be E and B. Since there's a 4 here, that means that we have to take the 4th scale degree of E, so that would be an A. And then it says to go to the 3, so that would just be the third scale degree of the E scale. and that would be G sharp. So our bass note would still be an E. You'll see why I'm moving the soprano so low, because I'm going to keep common tones in the other voices. So now let's go to the 1/6 chord. So I'm going to move the soprano up to an A, because that's only a half step and that's very conjunct. For the 7 diminished 7 chord, I am going to use B as a soprano. For the 1 chord, I'm going to move the B up to a C. It's all going in stepwise motion. And for the next chord, I'll do an A as a soprano. And over here, we have the 4/3 suspension. So the soprano has to go from an A to a G sharp. So the soprano is going to go like this, A, G sharp. Now that we've done our bass and soprano, let's do the alto and tenor. So for the tenor of the 5/4/3 chord, I am going to keep it as an E, because it's good to have common tones. For the alto, I will have a D. For the next chord, which is the I6 chord, I'm going to have the tenor as an E again. So as you can see, we're keeping the E common for the tenor, which is good. And we can let the alto and soprano share the A. Since it's only a 3-letter chord, we don't have to have all 4 voices. For the next chord, we can make the alto an F. And as you can see, that forms a tritone, so it'll sound nice if we resolve that in the next chord. And since the tenor has been keeping an E for these 3 beats, the tenor of this chord can be a D, so it's only stepwise motion. For the next chord, which is an A minor chord, we can move the tenor back up to an E. And we can move the F to an A. So the alto would be an A. So as you can see, the tritone resolves to a minor third. For the next chord, the alto can be an F to go along with the B chord, and we can have a B in the the tenor. For the last one, we have to keep B as the tenor because it is a common tone between the last chord and this chord. And the suspension continues throughout the half note. So let's listen to this part writing example. Hope that was helpful. Please like my video and subscribe to my channel. See ya!
I still don't get it.